All right, so we're going to go over scanning using the flatbed scanner in the lab and using Silverfast 8. So the application will not be in the dock. You will find an alias for it on the desktop. This is what it should look like. Looks like a Spectrum Eye. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And open it up. If it's not up to date, just hit OK. All right, so here we are. So one big difference is going to be the image source. I'm using, well, we have another check for updates. How about we cancel? All right, so the big difference we're going to see here is um, the type of printer. So it's both going to be plugged into the USB, but I'm using an older Epson Perfection 2400. I can't remember off the top of my head what the Epson is in the Mac lab, but it's the only scanner hooked up to it, so it shouldn't be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead. Don't play the movie unless you want to hear a German man telling you how to use the software. Otherwise, you just hit start. I have already loaded up a print in on the flatbed so we can see what it looks like. Yes, I was previously I was doing counterfeiting. So um, this is a good point. When you first open up the file, whatever was previously scanned in will pop up on your preview. So the first thing you want to do is hit pre-scan. And so now we have an image and of what's loaded on here, and I want to crop this right down to the image. So you do what you need to do for what you're scanning. I want it to go right to the image. Just gonna pull that in a little bit so I don't have any clipping. And so you can see that there's a red box that I can move around, right, and position what's going to be selected for the scan. Right, you don't need to, by default, it might go ahead and do the whole thing. If I come over here and I click and I drag, I can drag another uh, like scanning frame. So, and it's labeled down here in the lower left with the two. And so I actually have two. I have one when I click back on this one, and then I can click on this one and get two. If someone's done multiple scans, you might have a preview box window that comes up with several of these red boxes. Now I only going to make one scan, so I'm going to get rid of this one. And so with the number two highlighted, I can just go up to frame and delete active. And so it'll get rid of that one. Come back, I just have the one. I only want one frame. Now, if you were loaded multiple smaller images, photographs, or drawings or something that you wanted to scan in, you could have multiple ones loaded in and set up different frames. But for our purpose, we're just going to use the one here. Move that back in. Okay. So now let's here. Now, if you want to rotate it so that it is oriented right, I can do that here. Right. So there, now it's oriented the right direction. And now that I have it cropped down to the preview, and I can zoom in too if I need to. Um, But when you do zoom in, it's going to rescan it just to refocus it, and that's up to you. Um, Now I'm going to come over to the left side, and here's all of my settings for my scan. So let's go up the top. You have some icons up here, and the first thing is reflective. My scanner is only going to be able to do reflective. Now the scanner in the lab can have negative or transparent. All right, but you're always going to be scanning something in reflective. So that's going to be reflective, and then it could be positive and negative. On the other scanner, these will not be grayed in, and you will have the option to choose this, but I don't see anyone scanning in negatives on the flatbed scanner. We have a negative scanner with this software that does negatives, and it's suited for specifically scanning in negatives. So if you're scanning in negatives, you should go to the device that's going to do that the best. And that's not the flatbed scanner. So at this point, I'm going to go to color, and I want 48 to 24-bit color. And I'm going to scroll up, get to the top, and just work through some of these settings before I scan. The first is I'm going to go ahead and just name this. I'm just going to say scan demo. Now I have the option here to save it as a different type of format of file. Well, I'm likely going to be using this photographic image in Photoshop, so I'm going to choose PSD. I could choose another file type, but PSD is going to have the most colors and less compression of the image. It's going to give you a higher quality image. So a TIFF would be uncompressed as well. But for our purposes, it's already in Photoshop. It'll open in Photoshop easily. I'll leave it there. Now, where path, if I should be desktop on that computer. So I'm going to go ahead and save it to the desktop. And this is what it should say, right? It should say whatever the users, whatever the IT has set up the name of that computer, and then it should say desktop. That way you can easily access the file that you scanned in on the desktop and take it to where you need to go, whether it's in the cloud or on a flash drive. Now I'm going to scroll down to the PPI or the resolution, right? The dots per inch. We have it at custom. Again, it's 360. Everything you scan in should be at 360. I could go bigger, but 360 is optimal for for our purposes. So I'm going to scroll down, and the next thing that's really important is the output size. Okay, and so let me just put this as 100, and so we can see that the selection box over here, that frame, that red frame, is image is roughly 8 by 4, okay, and 100%. It's slightly brought in a little bit, and I could come over here and I could change that, right? Or I could change the top, make it closer to 4 if I wanted to. I don't want to get into the white of the page, so I'm going to leave it right there. All right, it's a little bit rotated on the flatbed. So you can see how it adjusts here. Now that's the input. Now the output is what you're going to get digital. And so for this, say, our purposes, if you don't know the output size for this project, you're going to be constrained by the size of the paper. So if you're not sure how large this source is going to be on your image, well, you could just default to, I'll make it as big as the paper. I'm not going to make it bigger than that. And so you can make it that large. Or you may know exactly what size you want this image to be as you start to compose your composition. And if that's the case, you know the size, then your output should reflect that, right? And so right now, well, maybe I'm not quite sure, and I know 13 by 19 is the size of my paper, so maybe I'm just gonna I'm gonna make the width 20. It's bigger than the paper. I can make it shrink it down some, but I don't have to worry about loss of information if I open it up in Photoshop and I want to make it bigger, right? Because it's bigger than the paper that I'll be printing on for this for 13 by 19 paper as an example. And so at that point, I'm ready to go. And you can see that the file size is getting already pretty large, right? It's 72 megabytes now, and it's just scanning this in. So there's one last thing I'm going to scroll down to, and that's this histogram. And I'm going to hit these curved arrows, so it just sort of reverts back to, default settings. And likelihood, it was changed. It remembered the previous settings. So I'm going to reset this. So this could be what you have. You could have something that looks like this. It just depends on the previous user. So I'm gonna go back to the default settings here. Now, make sure you pay attention. You have the output histogram here. I'm looking at just the histogram, right? And if I don't see this here over here, I can always click over here on the top of the preview window, hit histogram and this icon, and it'll come straight here. So I'm looking at this histogram, and we haven't covered levels in Photoshop yet, and we will get there. But when we look at this, it's essentially setting the lights and darks, right? The shadows and the highlights. You can see it here. Then on the far side on the right, you have the highlights, left side shadows, in the middle, you have the neutrals, midtones. So what I'm looking at, you can sort of look how the preview changed. And what I'm going to do is I want this histogram, this black graph, I want it to extend from one end of this window to the other end. And to get that to happen, I'm just going to pull the black slider in to where the histogram hits this baseline. I'm going to do the same thing for the white slider. I'm going to leave the gray slider in the middle range, right in the middle between the two. But what I'm doing is I'm going to pull just pull this in. So I'm going to essentially stretch out. When this gets scanned in, the black is going to go reach from this point all the way, and then the white all the way over this end. So it fills it out, gives you a much better representation of what you're seeing there. And you can see how the preview has changed, right? The preview went back sort of this more richer color, and this is actually truer to the actual image itself. And so this is what you want. You want to play with the histogram. Every image will be different, right? Every every histogram or image quality when it gets scanned in likely would need to be adjusted. I can very well adjust this in Photoshop. I don't have to do it here. However, in Photoshop, then you're starting to alter the pixels. If I do it in the software, I don't have to do it in Photoshop. I'm not altering there, and it becomes part of the image at its creation. Okay, and so this would be a better situation to do. Do it here. Now you're going to see this looks kind of grainy, and it's a four color separation uh, screen print, and so that's why it looks this way. You see the benday dots. That's because it's inherently part of the image. Um, and so at this point, I'm ready to scan this. Now, the only thing is I'm going to just make this one scan demonstration. Now this is a color image. Now if I was scanning something that was black and white, I could very well scan it in as a color, right, using the 48-bit to 24-bit color. And the file size would be larger because it's going to have all the different color channels when it creates the file. But if it's just a grayscale image, I could choose the 16 to 8-bit grayscale, okay? And now you can see what happens. The histogram drastically changes, but I'm gonna go back. I want to scan it in as a color. And so the benefit of scanning it in as a color is it reduces the overall file size. I'm gonna move this in just a little bit, it's clipping out a little bit of the white there. All right, so now it's ready to go. Once I've got the histogram ready, I got the size, dimensions, its output. I'll make it back to 20 just because I want it to be even. And it will automatically adjust the height and the width as long as this chain is linked, right? So you see that sort of bounding box. So it's ready to go, and at the top of the preview, there's a scan icon. I'm just going to click that, and that's scanning on your flatbed scanner using Silverfast 8. Recommend using Silverfast 8 because I color profile the scanner to the same color profile and color space that we use in Photoshop, so that when we go to print, um, it's easy to get an output that matches your screen. So we want the input to be in the same color space as your output, and also in the same color space as your working profile. So that's why we use this third party instead of like an Epson based scan driver. And so it takes a little bit slower time to scan, especially when you're enlarging it 250%. You can sort of see the status down here in the bottom window. It'll take a little bit. Um, if you're not enlarging it this much, if it's 100%, this would be a lot faster. And I will say the scanner in the lab is definitely going to be faster than my scanner here. All right, so now it's done, it's finished. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this. There's the image popped up on my desktop. Double click on it. It'll open it up right into Photoshop. So here it is. And you can start seeing that as I zoom in, it's decent quality. It's not pixelated, 300%. So, and if I go to my image size, you see it's at 20 inches by a little bit over 9 and 7/8. Resolution is 360. So total 773 megabytes, and there's the pixel. So there, that's scanning, and it's going to give you good quality. It's important to know what your output is when you go to input. That's key. And then the resolution 360.